They never really looked at me. Not really. And if they did, their eyes slid over me like I was part of the wallpaper. Unmoving, unimportant, barely human. I was Kira Langston, the one pushing the mop down the polished marble floors of Westridge Global, the one they called when someone spilled their overpriced coffee or smashed a glass during some booze-soaked after-hours networking party, the one they assumed had no opinions, no background, no dreams. To them, I was just the cleaning lady, a background extra in their drama-filled, overpaid lives, the one who carried around a bucket and wore cheap sneakers in an even cheaper expression, because who in her position had anything to smile about? And for a while, I played the part they expected, sweeping around their designer heels and expensive loafers, wiping their messes as they made new ones, keeping my head down, even when the laughter stung so loud it rang in my ears. I learned quickly how to walk silently past them, how to pretend the sting of their words didn't slice through my pride like a razor through paper. I became invisible in a world where visibility was currency, where the louder you bragged, the higher you climbed. But I wasn't always like that. I hadn't always been the ghost in the halls. I had once been a proud entrepreneur, owner of a promising cafe in Brooklyn that served both dreams and espresso, until a partnership betrayal and a brutal legal battle left me bankrupt and broken at 27. With no safety net, I took the first job that came along, cleaning offices at night while I tried to piece my life back together in the daylight. And it was in those long, fluorescent-lit corridors that I met Logan Hale, tall, smug, smugger than sin, with those manicured hands that had never scrubbed a thing in their life, and a laugh so cold it made my skin crawl. He didn't just ignore me. He used me as his personal punchline. "Hope you've got bleach strong enough for my success," he said once, walking past me like I was gum under his shoe. He'd toss his half-empty coffee cups into the trash can next to me instead of in it. Never mind the spill. "Mop girl," he called me. "Toilet queen." And worst of all, he always made sure he had an audience. Every insult was a performance. Every smirk a carefully calculated show of dominance. I could feel my blood boil with every word, every mocking glance, every time he called out, "Missed a spot," and the entire room exploded into forced, sycophantic laughter. But I never let my face betray my rage. I smiled politely, dipped my mop back into the bucket, and reminded myself that sharks circle quietly before they bite. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to even imagine, was that every single night after I left that building, I went home, brewed a pot of instant coffee, and cracked open my MBA textbooks. I was in my final year, studying finance and corporate leadership. I was acing every test, mastering every case study, learning everything about how companies like Westridge ran, and more importantly, how they fell apart. My fingers would ache from scrubbing office floors all day, and then from typing analysis papers all night. But I didn't stop. I didn't complain, because I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't just earning a degree. I was sharpening a weapon. Every humiliation, every condescending smirk from Logan, every whispered joke as I passed, those were weights I used to build strength. I didn't want their pity. I wanted position, power. I wanted to look them in the eye one day and watch the color drain from their faces as they realized the woman who once scrubbed their floor was about to rise higher than they ever dreamed. It wasn't just Logan. There were others too. Executives who stepped over me like I was a stain. Secretaries who spoke to me like I didn't understand English. Interns who acted like they ran the place after a week of coffee runs. But Logan took it further. He enjoyed belittling me. He called me out in front of clients once, joking that if I worked as hard on cleaning as I did on eavesdropping, the carpets might finally look decent. What he didn't know was that I was listening and learning. I picked up on client frustrations, budget mistakes, team conflicts. I knew who was being overpaid and who was quietly interviewing at rival firms. I knew things no one suspected I had access to. Because people say everything when they think the person in the corner doesn't matter. So I watched, I absorbed, I prepared, and deep down, I started to build something inside me that was stronger than the sting of their ridicule. I built a plan. I knew I couldn't outshout Logan, but I could out-strategize him. I could work harder, learn faster, move quieter, because unlike him, I knew the bottom. I knew struggle, and nothing lights a fire under you like knowing what it's like to be stepped on. While they played power games, I plotted my comeback. While they partied and gossiped, I studied. And while they looked down on me with smug satisfaction, they never once looked behind them to see who was quietly climbing with claws in the dark. They thought I was just a woman with a mop. But I wasn't mopping floors. I was mopping up their blind spots, their weaknesses, their failures. Every stain I cleaned was another layer of armor. Every room I scrubbed was another lesson learned. And one day, they were going to find out just how dangerous a woman becomes when she's been underestimated for far too long. Because I wasn't just cleaning their office. I was preparing to take it. The days that followed only sharpened the divide between who they thought I was and who I was becoming. And I quickly realized that their cruelty wasn't going to fade or lessen. It was going to escalate, like a storm gathering power, striking wherever I dared, show even a flicker of resilience. I heard every whispered jab, every snide remark echoing in the break room and hallways. Logan's voice, dripping with venom, carried the sharpest edge. But he was never alone. His loyal enforcers, Blair from HR, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes, but who wielded gossip like a weapon. Hunter in marketing, all charm and false politeness, with a streak of cruel sarcasm. And Theo in legal, slimy and calculating, always ready to pounce on anyone who didn't bow to the corporate gods. They all took turns unloading their mockery on me like it was a game they enjoyed playing. "She probably thinks she can buy this place with her mop bucket," Blair spat once, loud enough for me to hear as I wheeled a heavy trash bin past the break room door. Her laughter mingled with the others, a symphony of disdain, as they celebrated their own petty power, while I pretended not to hear, my heart tightening like a fist, but my face frozen in practiced calm. What they never imagined was that beneath the surface of their contempt was a quiet storm brewing, because while they were busy mocking the woman who cleaned their messes, I was quietly acquiring a stake in the very empire they thought I was beneath. When the Westridge stock plummeted, no one paid attention to the small, consistent purchases I made, almost invisible, but deliberate, like placing pieces on a chessboard while everyone else was distracted by shiny distractions and social media clout. Westridge wasn't just struggling, it was bleeding from within, and Logan, in all his arrogance, was ignoring the signs. His focus was on yacht parties, exclusive clubs, and Instagram influencers who flashed smiles that cost more than my entire yearly salary. The media painted him as a visionary, the young CEO with a golden touch. But insiders, people like me who saw behind the curtain, knew the truth. Departments were slashed, good employees laid off, budgets gutted without strategy, and advice from those who cared was dismissed as weakness. I witnessed meetings where Logan's attention was more on his phone than on the company's financial reports. He cared more about his personal brand than the business's survival, and that was the crack I needed. I wasn't just mopping floors. I was mopping up the remnants of his negligence, piece by piece. My nights were filled with poring over financial statements I found discarded in recycling bins, quarterly reports someone carelessly tossed away. I memorized every detail, every red flag, every tiny clue about which stakeholders were losing faith, which clients were quietly pulling contracts, and which board members were eyeing his downfall but waiting for the right moment to strike. I spent hours lingering near open office doors, ears straining to catch conversations that confirmed my suspicions, the mutterings of discontent, the undercurrents of rebellion against Logan's reign. While they thought I was an invisible mop-wielding shadow, I was an invisible force gathering strength, knowledge, and leverage. And through all the humiliation, the sneers, the snide remarks like, "Don't forget to clean behind the toilet, mop queen," which Logan flung at me one morning with a smug grin, I stood, unmoved. No flicker of anger betrayed me, because deep inside, I was already winning. This building, this company, wasn't going to belong to Logan much longer. I could feel it in my bones. Every insult was a reminder, every smirk a countdown to the moment when the tables would turn. I watched them from the sidelines, waiting, learning, calculating, my mind sharper than ever, despite the exhaustion that clung to my bones from double shifts and sleepless nights studying. I knew their weaknesses. I knew where the cracks were. I knew what they feared, and I was ready to become that fear. The same suits that scoffed at me had no idea that I was the one quietly talking to investors, quietly building alliances with Eleanor Griggs, a powerful private investor who was fed up with Logan's failures, but hadn't yet found the courage to stand up. I had her attention now, and that was a game changer. Every day was a battle of wills, a test of endurance, and I thrived on it. I endured their sneers because I saw beyond them. I endured their laughter because it was the soundtrack to my rise. And while Logan spent his days basking in shallow victories and superficial praise, I was preparing a revolution that would leave them speechless. The break room gossip, the mop queen jokes, the trash talk, they were fuel, not fire. I was the storm gathering behind their backs, the silent hand pulling the strings they didn't even know existed. And when the time came, I would show them that power wasn't about suits or swagger. It was about vision, resilience, and the will to fight when everyone else gives up. Logan's reign was slipping through his fingers like sand, and I was the tide that was going to wash it all away. The moment the opportunity struck felt like a bolt of lightning slicing through the long, dark night I'd been silently enduring. A blinding flash illuminating every ounce of preparation, patience, and careful planning I'd stitched together beneath the surface where no one was looking. Eleanor Griggs's surprise visit was meant to shake the very foundations of Westridge Global. Rumors had swirled that she might be coming to confront the leadership about the company's rapid decline. But what no one realized was that this visit would change everything for me, a woman who had long been invisible to the very people whose messes I cleaned daily. That afternoon, I was near the expansive lounge area, quietly dusting shelves and rearranging chairs, when a sharp, cutting voice broke through the murmur of office life. Eleanor was speaking on the phone, and though I tried to keep my head down, her words cut straight through the air and lodged deep in my chest. "Logan, he's just an overpaid boy with no vision. This place is sinking, and he's too busy chasing yachts and Instagram likes to see it." Those words echoed in my mind, not like an insult, but like a challenge. Here was a powerful investor, one who clearly saw through the facade that Logan and his circle had built, and here I was, right in the thick of it all, but unseen. That night, after another grueling day, balancing my job and my MBA classes, I found myself staring at my computer screen, heart racing, hands trembling just a little, as I drafted an email to Eleanor Griggs, a woman I'd never met, but whose influence could shift everything. I didn't ask for charity. I didn't plead for a chance. I introduced myself honestly, not as the cleaning lady who everyone thought I was, but as a woman who had been quietly observing, learning, and preparing for this very moment. I explained how the company was bleeding from leadership failures, not bad luck, and I attached a comprehensive, meticulously researched analysis I had painstakingly put together during late nights when no one else was watching. It was 5 pages packed with restructuring strategies, revenue recovery plans, and a boardroom-level strategy proposal, a blueprint for how Westridge could be saved if only someone with real vision took the reins. I sent that email into the digital void, unsure if it would ever be read, and then spent the next 2 days in a suspended state of anxious hope. When Eleanor finally called me in, the nerves I felt walking into that glass tower were unlike anything I'd experienced before. Gone was the invisible mop-wielding shadow. I was dressed in a thrift store blazer, clutching a resume I'd kept secret for years. The moment Eleanor looked at me, the words she said cut through the silence of my self-doubt. "You're wasted on janitorial duty." It was the first time someone had truly seen me. Not my uniform or my job title, but the fierce, intelligent woman beneath. "You're the first person who's made sense to me in years," she added, her voice carrying both relief and a fierce determination. From that day on, my life changed course irrevocably. I was no longer just a cleaner. I became her executive assistant, her confidant, and eventually her protégé. Eleanor was a woman who refused to let Westridge fall apart without a fight, and together we plotted a course to reclaim the company from the clutches of complacency and arrogance that had strangled it. Slowly, methodically, we chipped away at the toxic culture Logan had fostered. We restructured teams, brought back key players who had been sidelined, and began repairing broken client relationships, while Logan remained distracted by his social media fame and extravagant lifestyle. Eleanor and I were quietly winning the real battles that mattered. The office atmosphere shifted subtly, but palpably, as word spread that change was coming. The same people who had sneered at me found themselves eyeing me with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. Then, the moment that seemed impossible arrived. Eleanor purchased a controlling interest in Westridge, tipping the scales of power. And then, she shocked everyone by naming me interim CEO. The boardroom, once a place where my presence was mocked or ignored, became my stage. I walked in wearing heels instead of work boots, carrying not just my carefully prepared reports, but the weight of every slight, every insult hurled at me by Logan and his cronies. When Logan's face went ghost white and he sneered, "You're joking," I met his gaze steadily, my voice steady and calm as I replied, "I'm here to clean up the real mess." The truth in that statement hung in the air, undeniable and terrifying for those who had underestimated me. Logan's time was up. The arrogance and neglect he displayed were no longer tolerated, and I was the reckoning. The transition wasn't without its struggles. Board members loyal to Logan resisted. Alliances shifted, like sand beneath our feet, and whispers of sabotage and backdoor deals became common. But Eleanor and I were prepared for every move, having anticipated their tactics through the months of careful study and planning. I was no longer the powerless cleaning lady. I was a force of change, a storm they couldn't ignore or dismiss. Every day, I reminded myself why I endured the cruelty and why I refused to let their judgments define me. This was about more than just a personal victory. It was about reclaiming dignity and proving that true leadership comes from vision and grit, not inherited titles or expensive suits. When I gave my first speech to the company as interim CEO, I looked out at a sea of faces, some skeptical, some hopeful, and I spoke from the heart. I told them about the power of resilience, the importance of seeing beyond labels, and the need to fight for what's right, even when the world doubts you. The echoes of my words rippled through the hallways like a promise. Logan, once the king of the castle, was reduced to watching from the sidelines as his empire slowly crumbled, piece by piece, under the weight of real leadership. And me? I was just getting started. Because this story wasn't just about revenge, it was about transformation, about rising from the shadows with a purpose, about showing the world that strength isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and unstoppable. The mop bucket that once defined me had become a symbol of my grit and determination. I was no longer just cleaning up their messes. I was rewriting the rules of power. And as I stood in that boardroom, commanding respect and shaping a new future, I knew one thing for sure. They would never mock me again. The boardroom was suffused with a thick, suffocating silence as I stepped forward. The weight of every sneer, every whispered insult, every dismissive glance I had endured over the years, pressing down on me like a tangible force. This was the very table I had once knelt before, scrubbing its gleaming surface until my hands ached and my knees throbbed, polishing the symbol of power and prestige that had always felt so far beyond my reach. But today, everything had changed. The smell of stale coffee, expensive cologne, and unearned confidence still clung to the air like a stubborn fog. But the atmosphere was charged now with tension, anticipation, and a rising tide of reckoning. I took my seat at the head of the table, a place I had only dreamed of occupying in my darkest moments, and I felt the eyes of every executive, every board member, every sycophant in the room lock onto me like a spotlight exposing the underdog who had dared to step into the lion's den. Logan Hale's face twisted in disbelief and fury as he suddenly stood, his tall frame towering, trying to reclaim control with bluster. "This is absurd," he barked, his voice echoing off the cold walls. "She used to clean toilets." The words were meant to humiliate, to undermine me, to remind everyone of the place I came from, and the place they still thought I belonged. But I held his gaze, steady and unflinching, the fire inside me burning brighter than ever. "And I'll be cleaning out this company of the rot you've left behind," I said, my voice calm but resolute, cutting through the silence like a blade. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and anticipation swirling like a storm inside those walls. Behind me, Eleanor Griggs stood silently, her presence a rock-solid support, her eyes gleaming with pride and confidence in the decision we had made together. With deliberate care, I unfurled the evidence. Charts meticulously prepared, graphs painstakingly constructed, internal reports I had helped audit in secret, all painting a brutal portrait of failure under Logan's reign. I laid out the devastating statistics. 38% lost in shareholder value, a staggering 17% decline in client retention, and employee morale so low it had bottomed out completely. I described how Logan's obsession with lavish parties, social media influencers, and his own image had blinded him to the company's needs, how his poor decisions and public scandals had drained millions from the coffers and left the company bleeding. As I spoke, I could see faces blanch, confidence wavering, old alliances fracturing. Logan's attempts to interrupt, to deflect, to regain control only made me more determined. When he opened his mouth to speak, I slammed down the final document, an ironclad, board-approved termination clause that outlined his immediate dismissal, complete with legal justification. Effective immediately, I announced, voice ringing with authority. Logan Hale, you are fired. Your access to company resources is revoked. You will collect your personal belongings under supervision and leave the premises. The room was swallowed by a heavy, oppressive silence. Blair, once so sure and smug, looked as if she had seen a ghost, her confident mask shattered. Theo's hands clenched his tie so tightly it seemed to choke him, his usually slick demeanor reduced to pale panic. Logan, caught between rage and shock, stammered incoherently before erupting into a furious tirade, a desperate attempt to cling to the remnants of his crumbling empire. "This is a joke," he spat, voice rising to a shout. "She's a cleaner. What does she know about running this company?" His words were sharp, but they fell on ears no longer willing to listen. Calm and resolute, the security team moved in, escorting him out amid his protests and curses. His reign finally ended, not with fanfare, but with humiliation. As the heavy door shut behind him, sealing the past away, I stood tall, every muscle taut with the culmination of years of struggle and pain. "And your dirt I just swept out," I said quietly, but firmly, a final statement that echoed in the stunned silence, sealing the moment. This was no mere act of revenge. It was a powerful act of justice, a reckoning for every person who had ever been crushed beneath the weight of privilege and arrogance simply because someone deemed them lesser. The room, once a sanctuary of entitlement and exclusion, had become a place of transformation, a testament to resilience, courage, and the undeniable truth that strength and leadership can emerge from the most unexpected places. The eyes of those gathered locked onto me, a mix of disbelief, fear, and grudging respect swirling in their depths. Eleanor's steady gaze met mine, a silent promise that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges, resistance, and hard decisions. But as I sat there, the new leader of Westridge Global, I was ready to right the wrongs, to rebuild with integrity, to prove that leadership was earned through grit and vision, not inherited titles or shallow connections. And in that moment, with the weight of history settling on my shoulders, I whispered a vow, one born of every insult, every tear, every sleepless night spent dreaming of a better future. Underestimate me, and you will be swept away. This boardroom, this company, and this moment, they would never forget the day the cleaning lady claimed her rightful place at the top, the day justice was served, and the day a new era was born. For anyone who has ever felt invisible, dismissed, or crushed by the world, this was a beacon of hope, proof that with courage, determination, and relentless perseverance, the underdog can rise, the tables can turn, and the impossible can become reality. The journey was far from over, but the first battle had been won, and I was ready to fight for every inch of ground that remained. The silence that followed my decisive takeover was not just the quiet after a storm. It was the birth of a movement, a seismic shift that rippled far beyond the polished walls of Westridge Global. The news traveled fast, faster than I had imagined. Headlines exploded across media outlets nationwide, capturing the shock and awe of a story no one saw coming. A story about me, Kira Langston, the woman who had once been invisible, swept away beneath layers of scorn and disregard, rising like a tempest to claim the very throne from which I'd been mocked and dismissed. From mop to mastermind, one headline declared boldly, capturing the essence of the journey that had started with the clinking of a mop bucket and ended with the fall of a corporate giant. Another proclaimed, "Janitor turned CEO cleans house." Literally, while a popular online magazine posted my photo with the caption, "You'll never look at the cleaning staff the same way again." The buzz wasn't just about me. It was about shaking the foundations of what society thought it knew about power, worth, and potential. My phone began to flood with messages and emails from women dressed in janitorial uniforms, from overworked cleaning crews in small towns, in big cities alike, who told me I had sparked a flame of hope in their hearts. "If you can do it, maybe we can too," one woman wrote, her words simple but packed with unspoken pain and longing. College students from diverse backgrounds reached out, saying they were tired of being underestimated, exhausted from fighting for a place at the table, but inspired, more inspired than ever before, to rewrite their stories. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours. The moment belonged to anyone who had ever been laughed at for their job title, overlooked because of their uniform, ignored because of their station. The underdogs, the unseen, the underestimated. This was their anthem. With this newfound platform, I refused to let the message stop at symbolism. I transformed Westridge from a corporate ghost struggling to survive into a thriving, people-first powerhouse with a soul. One of my first acts was creating scholarship programs dedicated to the children of every employee, whether they polished desks or drafted contracts. I believed education was the key to breaking cycles of limitation and doubt. It was a way of saying, "You matter. Your family matters." I raised wages across the board, especially for janitorial and support staff who had been neglected for so long. The very people who kept the office running smoothly had long been invisible, their labor taken for granted. No more. Each dollar was a statement, a tangible acknowledgement of dignity, respect, and fairness. Every orientation session became my personal stage. I stood before fresh faces, new hires, eager or skeptical, and told my story, every detail, every humiliating jeer, every sleepless night spent studying, every calculated move that led me here. I watched as jaws dropped, eyes widened, and barriers of prejudice began to crack. "Let no one forget," I would say, "how blind arrogance looks, and how hidden brilliance sounds." One afternoon, as I strode through the familiar lobby that now felt more like home than a cold, corporate arena, I caught sight of a new intern sneering at the janitor diligently mopping the floor. The familiar sting of injustice flickered inside me, the same sting I had known all those years ago. I paused, turned sharply, and approached him, the sound of my heels clicking a rhythmic warning. He looked up, startled, his smirk fading as he met my steady gaze. "You know who held that job before I sat in that corner office," I said quietly but firmly. His eyes locked onto mine, wide with disbelief and sudden understanding. I pointed to myself. "Don't ever underestimate the person holding the mop, because one day they might be the one writing your termination letter." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken truths and newfound respect. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, the echo of my words lingering behind me like a whispered warning. Revenge, I had learned, was never about noise or spectacle. It was about quiet power, the kind that reverberates through time, changing minds and shifting the course of lives in ways no loud shout ever could. And mine was still echoing, louder and stronger than ever before. Yet, despite all the success and change, the journey was far from over. Challenges lurked in shadows, obstacles hidden behind smiles, and old rivalries waiting to be rekindled. But I was ready. I had weathered the storm, fought through the fire, and emerged not just victorious, but transformed, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to pave the way for those who would come after me. In the quiet moments, when the office hummed softly and the city lights flickered through the windows, I often thought back to the girl who once moved silently through these halls with nothing but a mop and a dream. That girl was no longer invisible. She was a beacon, a reminder that where you start does not define where you can go. The true measure of a person is not the job they hold, but the courage they summon, the resilience they build, and the change they inspire. And so, as the CEO of Westridge Global, I vowed to keep fighting, keep lifting others up, and keep proving every single day that no one should ever be mocked, dismissed, or forgotten, because sometimes the quietest voices have the most thunderous impact. The mop was gone from my hands, but the fight had just begun. And this time, it wasn't just about cleaning floors. It was about cleaning out the corruption, the prejudice, and the complacency that had held so many back for so long. For anyone who had ever felt less than, overlooked, or powerless, my story was proof that with grit, vision, and unbreakable spirit, the impossible could become inevitable. The final words echoed in my mind as I stood overlooking the city skyline, the weight of the past lifted, the future wide open. Underestimate the cleaner at your own peril, because sometimes the one you dismiss will be the one who changes everything.